Hello, YouTube. It's Lion here with Hobbies of Man once again, and today we have another episode of the Sword and Sorcery Book Club. And today we're doing something special. We're having an interview with Jeff Shanks, extraordinaire of the Conan mythos and essayist.
Making me blush.
Yeah. The essayist for the back of the Conan comic books as of right now. And I think you've done a lot of work with the license before, right, Jeff?
I have, yeah. I've been a consultant for the Modifius role-playing game, and a number of other projects over the years. Working with Heroic Signatures and their predecessor company, Paradox, for a number of years. Just
nice.
Kind of got a nice gig as being a Conan expert. It's kind of nice.
Yeah,
professional nerd. I love it.
Yeah, it's great.
Living the dream.
Yeah, and you work with some other ones too, right? Patrice, we met him at I saw him at Howard Days, but
at Howard Days.
Yeah, I didn't actually get to interact with him.
Yeah. Patrice and I go way back. For those who may not know, if you're familiar with the Del Rey 3-volume Conan set, Patrice was one of the editors of that volume.
Nice.
With Rusty Burke, and he writes the incredibly just informative and excellent essays in the back. Hyborian Genesis. Patrice is he's another Howard scholar. He's an expert on the texts, on the original Howard typescripts. Whenever I've got a question about the typescripts, or which story was written first, because Patrice has actually gone in and done almost forensic work looking at the actual typescripts, and you can tell, okay, like this letter is starting to fade, right? So it's got to predate this typescript over here, and he's been able to create a chronology of when Howard wrote certain stories based on the typescripts themselves. Which is almost archaeological work, right? Which is my alley, my bailiwick. So Patrice is fun. Patrice and I we've gotten in trouble a few times together in a couple of times. We can't talk about that in good company.
Right? Yeah. Okay, so how did you get into Conan? And is Conan even your favorite Robert E. Howard character? I think that's important to know.
You know what? That's actually a good question, right? Because the short reactionary answer is yes, right? Because it already comes to Howard to Conan and all that.
Yeah.
But God, that's a hard question. I mean, maybe in general, yes, I guess. But some of his other characters are really, really interesting in some ways. And maybe after years of reading Conan, it's kind of refreshing to visit some of the other characters. Yeah. Solomon Kane, I think, doesn't get enough credit for being such a complex figure who really has a character arc through the Howard stories. And he's very different, in a lot of ways than Conan. He's he's not an unreliable narrator, right? Because it's not told in first person, but he's certainly an unreliable protagonist. Right? In the sense that you're not really sure if he's actually completely sane. I mean, who does that? The things that he does, he meets some woman who, has something horrible happen to her, and he tracks down who he's never met before, complete stranger. And he tracks down the villain that, did this to her, and spends a year following the guy around the world, tracking him down to get vengeance.
Yeah, all the way to Africa. And it's what the hell? Why?
That's not normal. Normal people don't do things like that, right? So Solomon Kane is really in it, but yet he's written as though this is perfectly normal. And so, he's a fascinating character. Bran McMorn is a character who, some of the comic fans that are watch your viewers of your channel may or may not be familiar with, because he hasn't really he hasn't appeared in the New Titan comics yet. He's been mentioned in the essays a few times and name dropped here and there, and Jim Zub, the writer, has hinted that it eventually will play the Bran McMorn card. But Bran McMorn is a fascinating character of Howard's. For those who don't know, he's one of the last kings of the Picts, right? Who his stories take place around AD 300 or so. Kind of the sort of the waning years of the Roman Empire in Great Britain, right, in Roman Britain, and he's fighting against the imperialism of Rome in Britain, fighting to protect his people and protect his land from the encroachment of the colonialist, aggression of Rome there in Britain. And you get the sense through these stories that he knows that inevitably he's going to lose. You can't stand up against the might of Rome, right? But he's going to continue fighting for his people, and he's going to continue doing this. So he's a doomed character from the very beginning, right? Almost a Greek tragic type figure where you know that inevitably his end is going to come, and yet he continues to fight, and he's willing to do dark things in order to fight back against the Romans, right? I think one of Howard's most powerful stories, probably I would say one of his best stories, certainly top 2 or 3, is Worms of the Earth, a Brand McMorn story. Yeah. For your readers that may not have read it, I would encourage you, read Worms of the Earth. Yeah. It's got a Blackstone tie-in as well, right? Yeah. Those are a couple of my favorites. I'm not going to pick just one. I can't do it.
Yeah. Totally understandable. I always flip-flop between Conan and Cole, right? Because they have a lot of the similar kind of vibes to them, but I like Cole's setting a bit more. I like the way that he interacts with fantastical stuff a bit more often.
It's a bit more high fantasy, right? Yeah. Cole's world and the Thurian Age. Howard there. It feels more like some of the fantasies of Lord Dunsany. Some of your readers may be familiar or may not. Early 20th century fantasist. Yeah. It's about as close as Howard gets to more high fantasy, right? It's still pretty dark. But even the world, it feels more kind of nebulous and dreamlike, right? I think he was Lovecraft's Dreamland stories may have had something which were also Dunsanian influenced, right? May have had some, may have had a big influence on those stories, on the Call stories. Howard himself, too, in those stories was exploring more metaphysical questions, I think, than what you see in the later Conan stories. He himself at that time, was reading a lot of Eastern mysticism, literature and things like that. We see, themes of reincarnation start to appear in his work during this time. And you see that in the Cull stories. Cull is more philosophical. He's more interested in existential questions, than Conan. To some degree, that makes him interesting. It makes him different. People think that Conan's kind of a Cull knockoff, or Conan just comes from Cull, right? Yeah, a little bit, yes, but they're actually pretty different characters once you start reading those stories.
Yeah, I mean, it's because surface level they're basically the same guy. It's like a barbarian, and he's very broody, and he's kind of angry. But I think you are right. I think I've read more Conan at this point than Cole, mostly because there isn't that much Cole to begin with, right? But I always found like is it the mirrors of Thutun Thune? Is that the one where he sees the mirrors and he sees all of his different lives? That is like such a interesting story to me, and I really find it to be not necessarily better than any of the Conan stories. I think the Conan stories are probably better written, but it's just so much more interesting. And I think it's mostly because I think of like, people in the 1920s were having these like crazy, interesting ideas that are so prevalent now.
You'd be surprised. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're coming at a time, right after when some of Einstein's theories were being presented, right? And people are actually exploring ideas of higher dimensions and space-time and these things. We think of that as more modern ideas, right? But that was right when this stuff was coming out. And if you look, in Lovecraft and Howard's letters, they're talking about this stuff. Lovecraft was talking about it quite a bit, right? And Howard, like I said, he was reading the kind of literature that today we would think of as like, sort of New Age mysticism type, metaphysical literature and stuff. He was exploring those ideas himself. He was looking into Eastern mysticism and things like that. And you see that very much in things like the Mirrors of Tuzun-Thun, right? The idea of reality being an illusion and time and space, our perception of time and space as being a very limited one, and being able to experience all of that if you look at it from a higher perspective, a higher dimensional perspective, right? Those ideas were very prevalent at that time, and Howard was right on the cutting edge of reading some of that stuff and staying up on those ideas. Which, when you think about it, living in a little small rural town in Texas, it's amazing that in a let's be frank, a very very Judeo-Christian, framework that he's growing up in that society, even to be, having any kind of exposure to these ideas is pretty remarkable, much less be able to then turn it into an amazing story like the Mirrors of Tuzun-Thun,
Yeah, that was the most surprising thing about going down to Howard Days. I was like, dude, this is where he lived. Like, this place is like tiny. Like, there's more churches than there are people, I feel like.
I like to joke about Cross Plains. There's two political parties in Cross Plains, the Baptists and the Methodists.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, that was so amazing to me. I was like, this guy had such a huge, like, expansive kind of like ability to write fiction. Where the hell was he all drawing it from, right? Like, because there's nothing in his place, in the place where he comes from, that was like, possibly able to inspire that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. He was just a prodigious reader. He was an autodidact, right? He was self-taught. He had to actively seek out knowledge from external sources.
Yeah.
He was, he would order books. Mail order was a thing, right? We see in his letters, like his letters to his friends when he's young, when he's his late teens, early 20s, they're exchanging books with each other. They'll each read a book and then they'll like send it to each other. Like, hey, I just read this one and I'll send it to you, back and forth. They were, his small group of, circle of friends were, they were very well read, and they were, trying to break out of the confines of the small milieu, I don't want to say small-minded, but limited milieu in which they lived in, very rural, very local. They were, trying to do what they could to experience the outside world. Yeah. The other way he got it was through pulp magazines, right? That seems, we for your viewers again who maybe comic fans maybe don't know about the pulps, right? That's kind of, the pulp magazines are very kind of important to the discussion of Howard, right? These are the magazines that he wrote these original stories for. They were fiction magazines in the early part of the 20th century that were basically considered disposable fiction, right? People would read them and they'd throw them away, right? They weren't considered highbrow literature by any means. Some were, better than others. There were certainly tiers, right? You had some better pulps that were a little bit higher end, like Argosy and Adventure and some of these that are, certainly better writing than things like spicy detective stories, right? Which was almost soft porn, So Howard was reading things like Adventure, like Argosy. He was reading a lot of the pulp magazines that were at least the somewhat higher end pulps. And through that, you would get a number of ideas that were outside of his normal framework, right? You were getting, adventures in foreign locations, other countries, and learning about, political intrigues going on in other parts of the world. I mean, he was getting this through fiction, and maybe not highbrow literature, but, decent fiction. And, that was a lot of what I think inspired him and, opened his mind to the outside world out of this small little tiny corner of West Central Texas. Yeah. I think Adventure magazine in particular, which has stories that take place all over the world, he discovered that in his late teens, 16, 17, maybe something like that. And that was a big eye opener for him, I think. It's funny. You mentioned Patrice earlier. Patrice, this is the kind of stuff he does. He just posted on Facebook. He's just discovered a new Robert E. Howard letter, never before seen. Yeah, that appeared just going through old issues of Adventure magazine, the pulp magazine. He found one in the December 1923 issue of Adventure, a letter that Howard wrote to to the editor that was published in that issue. Never before seen. He just literally just posted that a couple of days ago.
Dang, that's so crazy. Like,
right. So December of 1923, that would have made Howard 17 years old.
Yeah.
You know, writing into Adventure Magazine and getting his letter published.
That's so cool.
How cool is that, right? So breaking news here for your viewers, right? I immediately went on eBay, and there was one copy for sale on eBay, and I had to buy it now right away as soon as Patrice posted it, because of course I did.
Yeah, that must have been so expensive.
It's not even here yet.
Yeah. So when did he start writing? Do you know that? Like, when did he? When did he get published?
Start seriously writing. He started seriously writing in his mid-teens in high school, around 15 or so. So very, very early. He was submitting stories, you know, to pulps when he was 15, 16 years old. They weren't getting published yet.
Yeah.
But he was also writing, you know, for his high school newspaper, and you know, there were some, you know, local newspapers and things. He was prodigiously writing by the time he was 15 years old, and submitting fiction, you know, to various publications that were really like way beyond his level. You know, like he didn't care. He was sending them off. You know, he's typing away on that, you know, that typewriter and sending them off, and let's see what happens. You know, some of his characters. One character that your viewers, if they're following the Blackstone miniseries and the recent Savage Swords issue, may now be familiar with, if they weren't before, is El Barak.
Yeah.
El Barak was one of the first characters that Howard developed. In a later letter, when he was older, he told the person he was writing to that he developed El Barak when he was 10 years old.
You mentioned this in the essay. I remember. Yeah.
10 years old. You know, I mean, maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. Howard did tend to exaggerate, but this may have been, you know, the first, you know, out of all of his major characters that we know of, that El Barak may be the first. El Barak is a nickname for his full name is Francis Xavier Gordon. Yeah. I know you like the Javier, you know, but
yeah, I know. I do like Xavier. I know it's Xavier, but I always think of it.
I know. I'm with you, man.
It's just like, I don't ever think of like Xavier as like an American name or like a name,
right? Or like Professor X, right?
Yeah,
you know, right.
Yeah.
But you know, this he's sort of an adventurer type character, you know, kind of an Indiana Jones prototype, you know, who has the adventures all over, you know, South Asia and the Middle East, and you know, very much your kind of quintessential pulp adventure character, like an Indiana Jones type. I'll throw this out there. It's not even a coincidence. We can actually draw a direct line of influence between El Barak and Indiana Jones. Through Jim Steranko. Jim Steranko is a famous comic artist who did Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. in the late 60s, early 70s, you know, legendary comic artist. He's also a big pulp fan and pulp collector. A lot of people don't know that. He goes to like the little cons like Pulp Fest every year. They only have a couple hundred people. Jim Steranko just shows up as a fan, you know. Cool. You know, and loves to be able to talk about pulps and not Nick Fury for a little while, right? So he knows Howard. He's, you know, really familiar with it. He did some artwork for a fanzine in the 1970s of El Barak. He did some illustrations of El Barak, in the 1970s, just for a fanzine. And one of the people that saw that fanzine, who's also a big comic book guy in the 1970s, was George Lucas.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize George Lucas owned a comic book store in the 1970s.
Really? Oh, I did not know that. That's cool.
Big comic book guy, right? Owns a ton of original comic art. So he saw that. And so when Lucas, a few years later, when they're, doing the work, the pre-production work on Raiders of the Lost Ark, Lucas remembered those El Barak drawings that Steranko had done. And so he hired Steranko to do the concept art for Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Really?
So if you Google Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones and Steranko, you'll see his concept art that he did for the movie.
That's cool.
But it was all based on Steranko's work illustrating El Barak for a 1970s fanzine.
Yeah, that's so
cool. There's a direct connection.
Yeah, very. That's
how cool is that?
Yeah,
Fun fact for your viewers that a lot of people don't know. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, Jesus, man, that's so cool. That's really interesting because I always think
Right.
of like the connection or like the lineage, I guess you could call it, of like fantasy fiction and stuff like that. So that's so cool. You know, I don't think
Hobbies of a Man exclusive. They're right there. For
yeah,
you.
thank you. Yeah. You know, I don't ever think of how I don't think Howard ever wrote, you know, the Elboric stories when he was 10, but I can definitely see it because, you know, Elboric is just like a little Texas guy that goes off and has cool adventures, you know, everywhere else, right? Like it makes sense that it'd be like, I hate my little town. I want to be somewhere else. I can't be anywhere, so I'm gonna write about it, and I'm whatever I imagine in my head, I'll just put it down.
And the character, for those who don't know, he's a Texas gunslinger, right? Yeah. So he's a cowboy, right? Like a pop culture, like gunslinger cowboy, right?
Yeah.
Who leaves the United States to go have adventures all over the world in all of the places that he was reading about in Adventure magazine, basically. You know, except he's a Texas gunslinger, right? I mean, the closest you get to that in other popular culture, there was the movie Hidalgo not too long ago, with what's his face? Aragorn.
I don't know.
The actor that plays Aragorn. Damn it. You know, I forget. But where he plays again a Texas gunslinger that ends up in Saudi Arabia, like in racing horses and stuff like that, right? So you know so you get that somewhat of a, I don't even want to say fish out of water, because the thing about Elboric is once he gets there, he completely is able to blend into the cultures.
He makes it into himself.
Yeah, but still has those skills, right? The word Elboric is Arabic for the swift.
Yeah,
and he gets that name because, you know, basically because he's fast, he's quick, you know, quick draw, fast with a sword, these kinds of things, right? So, he didn't really start writing the stories probably until his teens. So he had the concept of the character maybe when he was younger.
He didn't really thought about it,
the stories, and you know, until he was probably 14, 15, whatever.
Yeah.
Some of those early stories, they do survive. So a lot of them, mostly as fragments, like stories that he started and then kind of didn't finish.
Yeah.
And they have been collected in a volume called The Early Adventures of Elboric, by the Robert E. Howard Foundation.
Yeah.
So you can pick them up. They're really fascinating. I mean, they're not, you know, clearly, you know, he's a teenager writing these, right?
Yeah,
so
of course.
They're not as good as the later, more polished Elboric stories that he was writing in the 1930s. But they're really interesting to see him as the beginnings of his career as a writer, right? Yeah. And some of them, they're a little wacky, right? Like Elboric's, you know, he actually fights an early robot, right? The word robot, but it's like a metal automaton, right? That he's, you know, like that a mad scientist has and is there, right? I mean, it's, you know, the kind of stuff that he would have been seeing in the silent serials even at the time, right? In the early 20s. You know, there's dinosaurs in Africa where he's clearly pulling stuff from like Edgar Rice Burroughs and things like that. Some of the Tarzan stories.
Yeah.
You know, so you see him as a teenager, as a young man, honing his craft as a writer, writing the stuff that he knows, right? This adventure fiction that he loves so much, with early science fiction elements. Even like, the word science fiction hadn't even been coined yet. Right, he's toying with some of these ideas, you know. You know, he's a pioneer of this type of fiction, and so you know, I would recommend to your readers, if you want to go deep, and only to the ones that want to go deep, you know, you might pick up the early Elboric stories. He had kind of abandoned the character right in the 1920s as he became a professional writer. He went on to do Solomon Kane and Cull and Conan. And then by the 1930s, he came back to this character. He kind of resurrected this character from his childhood and started publishing stories in some of the other adventure magazines. You know, a much more mature writer. And the later Elboric stories, they're collected in one of the Del Rey volumes. And, you know,
Elboric and other desert stories, I think.
Yeah. And, you know, some are better than others. I know you picked one, and the first one you picked, like, God, when I was like, oh man, that's not the best one to really start with.
Yeah, I know. It's because when I planned that, I was thinking of like the first published story.
Right.
Like I wasn't thinking of like the best one. I should have asked about that instead.
Yeah.
But,
you know, because the one you picked was actually, it's one that the editor even like rejected in its long form, and he like trimmed it down and stuff like, and did it in different versions, maybe it wasn't the best one to start with, but that's okay, right?
Yeah,
like,
I mean, it happens. I was actually upset with the Kirwan and Conrad story too, because
I was going to say that's another one. Like
doesn't...
you picked like the one that's not the right one, right?
Yeah.
You should have done the next one, which was "Dig Me No Grave" is a much more representative story, right?
Yeah.
Oh
well,
that's okay. You want to talk about that since this is the reading club like one. So we talked about Oberok, right? This is one of the characters that's in the Blackstone event, right? Conrad and Kirwan, that's another one. So they first appeared in the story, that you did an episode on Children of the Night, which is really, it's not really an occult detective story, which is what they're known for. It's really more of a sword and sorcery story.
It really is. It's almost like that new Alien or the Predator movie. Prey,
right?
It's almost like that.
Prey, right? Yeah. It's very similar, right? This is something. So this is something. Again, we're going to go on a lot of tangents tonight.
Don't worry.
This is good. We're going to do a lot of stream of consciousness stuff on Howard here. So one of the things that Howard is known for, right, is sort of creating these kind of hybrid genres.
Yeah.
Sword and sorcery itself is kind of a hybrid genre. He's thought of it as the father of sword and sorcery. And that's because sword and sorcery is really sort of swashbuckling adventure fiction mixed with horror and weird fiction, right? And that's what sort of it's not so much traditional sentimentalist fantasy, as it is, swashbuckling, adventure fiction mixed with horror, right? He also is known as the father of the weird Western, which is a genre today that's, it's pretty popular. You see it a lot today, right? Horror from the Mound was one of the first real popular weird Westerns where you have, a cowboy fighting a vampire, again, hybrid genres, mixing things together. So Howard was doing this kind of thing very intentionally for a commercial purpose, right? As a professional writer. He had broken into weird tales as a writer, right? That was his market that he knew he could always sell to. He could always sell a horror story to weird tales, right? But he wanted to break out and try other genres. So when he did, he would often do something in another genre, but he would throw a supernatural element in it because he knew if he couldn't sell it, he could always sell it. He'd turn around and send it to Weird Tales and they'll buy it, right? So I mean, he even had weird boxing stories, right? He tried, probably the weird boxing genre never took off, right? But he tried, he'd have a boxing story, but he had a ghost in it. So he tried to sell it to fight stories. They're like, no, this is weird.
Yeah, this is odd.
Right? So, all right, fine. I'll sell the ghost stories or weird tales. That's what he was trying to do. But what you also find is when he's trying to dip his toes into a new genre, he will have elements of a genre that he's already good at. Right. And so in this sense, Children of the Night, it begins for, your readers, I would say, go back and listen to your episode, right? Where you go into the story. It begins with a bunch of, sort of academics, that are interested in the occult and things like that. The 100% the old like colonialist white guy is sitting in the whatever the study talking about all of these different races and stuff, and you're 100% right to call that stuff out, right? That the old school racialist anthropology that was prevalent in the day, which unfortunately is very cringy, and it's there, right? That's a whole other conversation.
It's part of the times. I just kind of move on from it. It's like, okay,
it's part of the times, right?
It is what it is.
Well, whatever. But you know what? It is if we think of it in fictional terms, right? All these guys that were into the anthropology of the times, these characters in the story, that's the kind of thing they would have been talking about.
Of course.
Unfortunately,
it's still technically correct within the confines of the story.
Right. But a lot of the conversation in the story, especially Conrad and Kirwan in that dialogue that's taking place in the beginning of the story, comes straight from correspondence from Lovecraft and Howard.
Really?
It comes right from their letters. They had just started talking to each other, and this is the kind of stuff they're discussing in those letters. So, is it really a Mediterranean race, or is it a Turanian race? All this kind of nonsense that we all know is pseudoscience now, right? Not a lot of like what they're saying, that dialogue comes verbatim from the conversation of Howard was having back and forth in their letters at the time. So so he's already thinking about like wanting to do a Lovecraftian type story. And so he's kind of dipping in there a little bit. He references the Necronomicon, and he introduces his own version of the Necronomicon, this grimoire, nameless cults. And even in that story, if you remember, he actually names Lovecraft by name. He talks about the volume, like the horror fiction in the guy's library, and he mentions a couple of real horror writers, and among them he mentions, and one of my favorite stories is Lovecraft's Call of Cthulhu. It's just like a little fun Easter egg for his buddy, right? So which is fun because that means that Lovecraft actually exists in the Howard verse.
Which is really a fun thing, interesting. Right? Like it allows for
it's kind of meta, but
funny things.
Right. So Howard's like already getting the idea that he wants to start trying to write a Lovecraftian type story. He does it though in this story. What ends up happening, some of your viewers, if they watch that episode, will know. They end up having a reincarnation episode, and one of the people there in the study remembers a past life as a warrior, in the early Bronze Age. Fighting against the children of the night / people of the dark / worms of the earth, right? These creatures that like devolve as they go underground, right? And they have the black stone as their one of the things that they worship. And so it turns into a sword and sorcery story because that's what Howard's familiar with. So he's dipping his toe into this Lovecraftian stuff, right? And Lovecraftian tropes a little bit. But at the end of the day, he's just writing a sword and sorcery story because that's what he's comfortable with. But the next appearance of Conrad and Kirwan is Dig Me No Grave. And that is very much a Lovecraftian type story where you've got scholars that are experiencing some kind of weird fiction, extra some creature from the outer dark kind of thing, and it's messing with their minds. But they're experts in the occult. So you're getting into this occult detective genre, but with Lovecraftian elements. And the rest of the stories kind of take off from there. So unfortunately, you picked the transition story.
It happens. It's all right.
But it's interesting because it gives you, it gives you kind of an insight into Howard as a writer. He would do this a lot. And even a lot of the Conan stories, they're other genres, right? They're not just quote fantasy, right? They're pirate stories, they're crusade stories, they're Cossack stories. He's playing in other genres, even with the Conan stories. But always there, it's got that sword and sorcery element. He's getting to write in those other genres that he enjoys. God in the Bowl is a procedural detective story, for better or for worse, right? These are, so this is what Howard loved to do. He loved to, play with the genres, play with genre tropes. Even when he's writing sword and sorcery, he's throwing things from other genres in there, and that's what's kind of fun. With the Savage Sword issue, with the Black Stone event, your readers or your viewers that may just read the comics, may just be used to Conan, they're getting a little sample of some of these other genres that I would like to play in.
I thought that was great. I actually really liked that issue. Well, that's where you had a story, right? So
I did.
So, it's based on the fragment, which is literally the last piece of paper on the horror stories book, right?
And it's such a tease too, right? Like you read that story, it's such a tease,
and something's coming, but nothing ever does because
it's So again, you did an episode on that, and that's why I was like, you know what, I'm gonna run with this one because it is such a tease. Like you can tell. So again, just to kind of recap, so the story that you're referring to that I wrote a Conrad and Kirwan story for Savage Sword of Conan #4. This was my, those of you that know me as a Howard scholar, this was my first real attempt at writing Howard style fiction. I did a little bit for the Modifius game, but that was in the context of a role-playing game and doing lore and stuff, so a little different. Although one of the things I did do for Modifius was I wrote a sort of a fictional letter in there talking about the Hyborian Age in the voice of Kierwin.
Yeah.
So I did have some experience, writing as Kierwin, right, as Professor Kierwin. And the sort of occult archaeologist. Again, for your viewers that may not know, in my day job, I am an archaeologist. Yeah. So it's less of a stretch maybe than trying to write Dark Agnes or something like that. So I'm writing the Conrad and Kierwin story. What I wanted to do, I've always loved this fragment. It's untitled. It doesn't have a title. It was published at one time. Somebody gave it a fake title, Black Eons or something like that. One of the old collections. Where somebody tried to finish it. Pastiche style. But Howard never had a title for it. He started writing this story. Two characters that are excavating in Egypt. They don't really say where in Egypt, but one of the main characters believes that what they actually have is a pre-Egyptian tomb or site that they're excavating that's actually Stygian. And so you've got a character here. This is actually fairly rare. A character in Howard's modern day, the 1930s, talking about the Hyborian Age. Yeah. This does happen a few times, right? And he references again, Howard's fictional, dark book, grimoire, Nameless Cults, written by the German occultist von Junz, right? So as far as like the Howard verse goes, what this is kind of important for Howard's world building. The story itself, it's a fragment. They're digging in the Stygian tomb. You don't find out what happens because Howard kind of abandons it. Presumably they're digging into a Stygian tomb. Bad things are going to happen, right? But we never find out what they are, right? He abandons it, but it's important for understanding Howard's world building. So this is one of the things that we know. We know that knowledge of the Hyborian Age, this lost epoch, it comes down to the modern era via von Junz in the book Nameless Cults. Okay. Right? So that means we look at some of the other stories where Nameless Cults appears and characters that have read Nameless Cults, like Conrad and Kierwin, this very rare, this rare tome, will know about the Hyborian Age, right? So, that's one of the things. Even when I was working with Jim Zub, right, on the Black Stone thing, we're talking about them. Let me think about how much I can say.
I don't want to get. I'm barely on Titan's good side, dude. I need you to not.
Oh no! Don't me too. Hey, listen, no spoilers, right? But that is something to know going into this. One thing about Conrad and Kierwin, and you get this from the Savage Sword thing, is that they have knowledge that the Hyborian Age existed. They're some of the few people in the modern era, which is 1930s, right? That know that the Hyborian Age was a thing. They know this because they read Nameless Cults. Now, I mean, let me qualify that. Was von Junz just a madman? Is it real? Who knows? Where did von Junz get this from? How does he have knowledge? In the Modifius thing, where I played with the same idea, I had it that von Junz was quoting from the Nemedian Chronicles, that he had somehow gotten access to found the Nemedian Chronicles, and that's where he got it from. I kind of made that up, but it makes sense, whatever, right? Like with world building. But that's an important thing to know about Conrad and Kierwin as far as the larger Howardverse goes. There are some of the few characters in Howard's, modern era that know that the Hyborian Age existed. And there is another story. It has Kierwin in it. Conrad's not in it. Called The Haunter of the Ring, in which the Ring of Thoth-Amon actually is the MacGuffin in the story. Survived all these years, thousands of millennia, millennia, right? And to survive into the modern era. And Kierwin knows what it is, or he knows it's associated with Thoth-Amon. So he also knows the name Thoth-Amon. So that's one of the cool things about Conrad and Kierwin is, they are some of the few people that have some knowledge of the Hyborian Age. They may not know how much of it's real, how much of it, whatever, right? And So that's part of part of their story is trying to learn more about the Hyborian Age. So I wanted to, with this fragment in the story I was writing for Savage Sword, I wanted to kind of do a sequel to this fragment, mostly because it leaves us hanging, right?
Yeah.
And so that was the idea. I wanted to turn it into a Conrad and Kierwin story. So I have the guys that are sort of treasure hunters excavating this Stygian thing, reach out to Conrad and Kierwin, have them come to Egypt. I set it actually in the Sinai Peninsula. There's a lot of Easter eggs here. If you for people that really want to dive deep, there's a mention that the guy that's excavating it, he thinks it may be the ruins of Cuthkimes, which is the ancient Stygian city that appears in the story Black Colossus.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And if you look at Howard's map and where that would be, in modern, with the modern geography, it would be somewhere kind of in the Sinai Peninsula.
Nice.
So I kind of threw that in there. Again, little hidden Easter egg for folks. If they want to track that down. There's a Robert Bloch reference in there too, another writer for Weird Tales, part of the Lovecraft circle. He's the guy that wrote Psycho, the famous Hitchcock movie was based on. So there's a bunch of fun little Easter eggs I put in there for anybody that wants to really deep dive into that story. I was having a lot of fun with that.
I bet. Yeah. So, okay. So you said you had a lot of fun with writing it. So what was the process like though? Like, how do you?
Wow, it was very different.
Getting to there.
Oh my God, it was so different, right? Like I've toyed with writing fictional prose. I've done that some. I've edited. I edited a weird fiction journal. For a while with Mark Finn and Chris Gruber, Skelos magazine.
Yeah, I've heard about it.
So I've dabbled in writing prose. So, and I had the idea for the story, but writing for comics is so different. Because it's a visual medium as much as it is a textual medium.
Yeah.
And successful comics, integrate the two. It's not just all visual, it's not just all text. You've got to integrate the two and create something that's greater than the sum of its parts. And it's more challenging than you would think, and I went out and read all the books. I read, Scott McCloud. I read all, what I mean? I read, to try and get into that idea, learn how to do it. I read, Alan Moore's, book and several
Marvel Way, right? And all of those.
Exactly. Art of Marvel Way I had as a kid, even, right?
Yeah.
So, so I'm working on that, trying to, thinking about things a little bit differently, like even things like page turn reveals and those kinds of things that you don't normally think about when I'm, I was writing the script for this. I was very fortunate in that Jim Zub was incredibly patient and generous with his time to help me out and to give me pointers. When he read my first draft for me, he's reading it and he's so, because Jim is the nicest guy in the world. Yeah, he's so nice. He's such a good guy. He's such a good guy. He's reading. He's like, he's like, this is, what, for first, this is actually not bad. This is pretty good. He's like, you got a page for me here. Like, I can tell you read a couple of the books. Okay, sure, right? He's like, why don't you try that? Let try this and try that. I'm like, oh man, right? God, that's so much better. He was so good. Chris Butera, also, the editor, who also comes from more of a prose background, right? And is a fantastic editor, from a prose background, but he's also, somewhat new at editing comics. He's coming in, but he had some great advice as well. So I was very fortunate in that I had some giants, to shoulders to stand on to help me out with this first story. And, I'll be honest, to be frank, I know that, the story it's very tame in some ways and very safe. I was honestly just trying to not screw up. I think you did a good job, Jeff. You don't have to qualify anything. I thought it was good. I thought it worked well. It functioned well. It had everything you needed it to have. I think it's a great, story for basically a very limited amount, right? Like, well, and that was a challenge too, right? It's only, in fact, it was originally, I think, supposed to be 9 pages. I begged for another page just to try and make it work because that's so small to try and tell a story. It's it's really hard. I could have gone on and on for if that were a prose story, I could have had all kinds of fun with it, stretched it way out, right? But you can't do it, and you've got to save enough, space on the page for the action, right? That's another thing. You've got there's a sort of the fight scene, and you want to give the artist a chance to make that visually breathe, right? So I can't, so it was very challenging writing a comic story. I mean, people, I think, take for granted how hard it is to write for comics. It's very different than prose. It's a lot harder than you think. And as somebody coming in, take my word for it.
Yeah, I'm sure it is really difficult, but I think most people probably don't think about it just because to them it's like it's just for entertainment, right? Like,
right? They don't think about it, And listen, I'm a comic. I've been reading, and collecting comics my whole life. I'm and so I at least can think in that visual medium, But trying to actually do it, it's tough. That said, I loved it, and I really want to do more. Chris, if you're watching this, man, I got a pitch for a story for you.
So you got some ideas coming? But okay, let me ask you: do you want to do more work in the Robert E. Howard universe, or are you thinking like you want to do something, your own?
You know what? That's an interesting question. Short answer: yes, I certainly want to do more work in the Robert E. Howard universe because that's what I know well and I love it. Right. But it's interesting that you say that, because one of the things that I have in mind, and I've already been working on a script for, is a graphic novel retelling of the story of an archaeological site that I've been working on for a number of years.
Nice.
That I think is an incredible story. It is it's not well known. Briefly, it's a kind of a tangent, right? But it's the site was a fort that was built during the War of 1812 in Spanish Florida by the British. So a lot of people don't even know much about the War of 1812 these days, right? But it's kind of a follow-up to the Revolutionary War. It's kind of the second war against the United States. A young United States fought against Great Britain. It's mostly thought of as a naval war, and they fought in Canada and things like that. There was a Southern front in that war, lesser known. The one big battle that people know is the Battle of New Orleans, where Andrew Jackson, as a young general, kind of made his name. In the story that I'm talking about, Andrew Jackson is very much the evil villain of the whole story. Tywin Lannister of this story, 100%. Because he is in real life. And the British came and they built a fort in Spanish Florida. And what they were doing was they were recruiting both indigenous people that had been fighting against the Americans, Creeks and Seminoles, but also people of African descent who had escaped from enslavement and come into Florida and were living in Florida already, or people that could escape from enslavement in Georgia and come down into Spanish Florida and join the British. And the British trained them as colonial Marines to fight against the Americans in the War of 1812.
Really?
And they fought nobody knows this, right? They fought in battles against in Mobile and Pensacola, and maybe even in the Battle of New Orleans, against Andrew Jackson and his forces. After the war was over, the British left. They pulled out. They took a number of people with them, and they were now British citizens. They were resettled in the islands, but hundreds of people stayed behind after the British left. Here again in Spanish Florida, several hundred people of African descent. I don't want to say African Americans because some of them were from Spanish towns like Pensacola,
like Afro-Latinos and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's like too limiting to even say African American, right? These are people of African descent who now that stayed behind, who now had a fort, cannons, were trained as Marines, guns. The British gave them all the supplies they could before they left. So you had a free Black community here in Spanish Florida. It was probably one of the largest free Black communities in North America at the time. That was a destination for people to escape to. So people were coming there. They had this fort. They could defend themselves. It was on the Apalachicola River, which runs through Florida from the Gulf of Mexico up into what's today Alabama and Georgia. Controlling this major river. It's an incredible story of an incredible people that nobody knows about. They lasted for about a little over a year before the Americans attacked. illegally invaded Spanish Florida on the orders of Andrew Jackson.
Of course.
They fought a siege there. They fought a battle. The Americans fired on the fort with a heated cannonball that just by happenstance happened to hit the powder magazine in the fort. Yeah. Major explosion. It killed many people, right? But and that was the end of this fort in this story. But people did survive. They went on to join the Seminoles. They took their training and they went on to train others, and they fought in the Seminole Wars for decades after that in Florida, continuing to fight against American expansion and colonialism. You're just trying to find a space to live free. Where people will just leave them alone, and many of them eventually, decades later, actually signed the treaties along with some of the Seminoles and agreed to go out to Oklahoma, the Indian territory, on what we now know as the Trail of Tears. People don't realize that there were Black people on the Trail of Tears.
That is an insane story. Thank you for sharing.
So I'm hoping to do this as a graphic novel, because one of the things I'm trying to do is get this story out there, right? I've done a lot of the archaeology at the site. We've learned a lot even just from doing the archaeology about the people that were living there. So I think this would be an incredible story for a graphic novel.
I would read it for sure. So I think so too.
It's a long answer to your question. I know you weren't expecting that, but that's a project that now getting a little bit of experience in writing comic book style. I would love to do this because it's a story that young people might actually read and hear about if it's in a graphic novel format. This is a story that's important to get out there. People, like you said, people don't take the comic format seriously, the sequential art format seriously. It can be serious. It can be used to tell real stories. And I'd love to try and do that.
I think that's great. I would love to read that. if you ever get it off the ground, send me a copy.
Help me convince Doug Braithwaite to be the artist.
That'd be amazing. That'd be so cool. Jesus Christ.
He would be
awesome. That's awesome, dude. Okay. So, Jesus Christ.
Sorry. I know I took us really far down a tangent.
No, it's great. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, let's see. What else did I have to ask you about? Okay, so when you wrote the story for the Savage Sword of Conan issue, you were collaborating with Jim because you work with him as it is, right?
I did, yes.
Was there any collaboration with any of the other writers for Savage Sword? Like, how does that work?
Do you know? Really, right? Because Jim's story is the main story that we all needed to tie into, right? And of course, because I'm doing the consulting, so I'm reading. I actually probably I have much more knowledge of the larger story, the larger picture Jim's doing than many of the other writers, that tied into it. Because I've kind of been along for the beginning, hearing him pitch his ideas, and we brainstorm about it. So there was a couple of things that we had to, elements that I had to do. They had to see the sign. They had to do those things. So I had to, there was a couple of things I had to work in, to make it fit. But for the most part, I was able to, kind of do my own thing. So it worked. I had to make sure, I hit a couple of the notes that needed to be hit to make it tie in. But really, I didn't really interact with any of the others.
All of that stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, I only had a vague idea, honestly, of even what some of the other stories were about. I know Jim's story, right? I know because I'm reading all of that, but I actually hadn't seen any of the stuff for the other Savage Sword things. I kind of vaguely knew what they were about, but I read them for the first time when I got my comp copy of the issue, just like everybody else.
Nice.
Which was kind of fun. As a fan, it's great that it all, kind of came together. Jim was really the maestro. That really made sure, the conductor that made sure all those moving parts came together and fed his larger story that he's working on, including mine. So
that makes sense. I mean, I was just asking because I'm always curious, right? Like when it comes to an anthology magazine, right? The people that work on it know, right? And there really is never a chance to ask them because
not really. In fact, like I said, only by happenstance, I probably knew more than the others about the bigger picture. Just because I'm, doing the other consulting and writing the essays and doing all of that stuff. Patch probably has some idea, I guess, because he's
I'm sure. That makes sense.
Probably more than some of the others since he's doing, the regular Solomon Kane stories, Patch. But
Yeah, I think he said recently that one of his new Solomon Kane stories was accepted, so I'm sure he'll have more to do soon.
I have some idea of where he's going.
Oh, that has to be off air.
I'm super excited.
That's so exciting. That's so cool. I really love his art style.
Me too.
Okay. Yeah,
big fan.
Yeah. Okay. Another question that relates to this.
Sure.
Do you pick your own artists? Do they get assigned to you? Do you work with how was working with the artist in this case? I think that's
it was great.
Eryk question, right?
Eryk is super cool. I actually just recently learned. I was actually just talking, even after working with him all this time. I didn't realize we're actually from the same hometown in Florida.
Really? That's so cool.
I literally just learned that this week when I was talking with him about buying some of the original pages from that story.
Yeah.
Which I had to do. I had to own a couple of pages from my first.
From your first story. That makes total sense. I definitely.
So I did. Yeah. I bought the pen up. There's the Conrad and Kieran pen up he did, and I got a.
That was awesome. I really like that one.
So I got that, and I got two of the just 2 pages in sequence. Showing O'Donnell. They're really the 2 pages that this kind of goes a little bit to your question, the idea of working with the artist, right? The pages where I feel like he captured my vision pretty well through the whole thing.
Yeah.
The 2 pages where I think he just absolutely nailed it. Like I feel like he took the picture that was in my brain and he put it on the page.
Yeah.
Those 2 pages together, I had to buy those. And that was for those. Yeah. Hopefully by now you've read it. Your viewers.
I'm sure they have.
The page where you get O'Donnell. Almost like a 2/3 splash page. You see him and he's all like where he's first revealed, and he's got all the symbols carved in his body and all that. And he's holding the knife, and he's kind of nuts. I got that page and the page right before it, kind of leading up to it. Eryk absolutely just pulled the vision right out of my head. Especially in those 2 pages. As far as the process, we were, toying around with a couple of artists. We threw a couple of names out there. He was one of the ones that was being discussed. There were several others that we threw out there. Several weren't available, and Eryk was. And so, we ran with it. I knew that he had done some Constantine work, right? So he's familiar with the sort of occult detective genre, so that was perfect. And it's fun. I think one of the fun things, I actually visited Egypt last year. I did a tour of Egypt. It's something, a lifelong dream for me. I went myself and a couple of friends, a couple of other archaeologists, and became good friends with the tour guide. My tour guide Mahmoud, so shout out to Mahmoud who took us around. I'm hoping to actually go back and lead some tours maybe in Egypt. Anybody wants to go on a tour of ancient Stygia, let me know. I could do a private archaeology tour. Yeah, right. So one of the things I did was I asked Eryk if, hey, what would be fun? We've got an Egyptian tour guide, kind of an Egyptian guide character in the story.
Yeah.
Could you base it on Mahmoud?
This guy. Yeah, that's cool. I love that. Right?
And so he did. Yeah. Like I sent him some pictures of Mahmoud, and I let him know. It's like, hey, Mahmoud, you cool with this? And he's like, oh my God, that would be amazing. Yes, please.
That's so cool. I love that.
Right?
Yeah. That's a great.
So the character that's in the story, Mahmoud, who's kind of the guide, is based on a real life professional tour guide in Egypt, who's amazing.
That's so cool. I love that. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so. Let's see. What else do I have to ask you? There's so many things I want to ask you, right? But I have to
give me a prompt and I will talk for an hour. You know me. Yeah. I'm kind of talk if you haven't guessed.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. How do I word this? Let me.
Okay. You tell me.
Yeah.
We could talk about how I came to Robert E. Howard. We could talk about that was comic related actually.
Really? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'll come back to that later. We're still on the.
I'll give you a prompt. I'm throwing prompts out there for you.
Yeah, dude. I was thinking about it. I was like, dude, I don't even have to ask him questions. He just like.
Oh, I just go, man. Yeah. I just That's how I do it.
That's great. Thank you very much. I am really appreciating it. Okay, so we've talked about some of your collaboration. I heard recently that Jim is already writing issue 20 something of the series, right? So
way ahead.
Yeah,
I can't even keep up. I'm supposed to be reading all these scripts and like giving him feedback. I'm like,
yeah.
Lord, man, God, I can't keep up with you.
Yeah. So your work as the guy that writes the essays for the back of the story that relate to what's happening in with the license at the time. How far ahead do you have to plan, or like what's the process like in the sense of like when do you turn in your essay for a given issue?
So I'm 3 or 4 issues ahead of where we're at now. I just so what I've got coming up, I've got the essay, the final essay for the Blackstone miniseries for issue 4. I've got that coming up next, and I've got let's see, what was the last one I did? I think I did the Frost Giant's Daughter, and I did Beyond the Blackstone, or Battle of Blackstone 3 just recently. So yeah, the next two I have to do, it would be issue 17 and Battle of Blackstone 4. So that gives you an idea of about how far ahead I am.
Yeah, a few months.
In fact, I probably need to look at I probably have one due here. I probably need to look at my schedule here and see what's next.
Yeah. No, I was wondering because I didn't know Jim wrote that far ahead. And then I thought about it. It's like, oh, how far does Jeff write? Okay, so how do you come up with?
So I know kind of ahead of time. I can be thinking ahead of time, like what we're going to do. Like, so I've kind of got at least the topics planned out, because I know what Jim's doing. So I've got the topics planned out, like into the early 20s on the regular series now.
Yeah. Okay.
At least, and it may, there may be some tweaking. There's a couple where I could I could do this for this issue or do that for that issue. You know what I mean? But for the most part, I've got a rough idea of what the topics are going to be. Yeah. Because there are times where I have to go do some research and like, I haven't read that in 15 years. I better go reread that story. Yeah. Remember, right? So at least I'm thinking ahead 5 or 6, 7 issues even. Yeah. Because we also want to plan, because I got to be careful that Jim's got surprises coming up, and I don't want to accidentally give stuff away. I'll say even with the Blackstone event, there's a couple of surprises that I have that I've been very careful and even used my essays working with Jim to kind of steer people in the wrong direction a little. Yeah. You know what I mean? Just to like kind of get them away so that like the reveal will be, so I'll admit we do that a little bit too. We play with you a little bit. We're trying because we want to have cool surprises and that kind of thing to make it fun. So there is some thought into it. So but yes, I'm like actually writing. I'm about 3 issues ahead. Yeah. As far as vague ideas of what the topics are going to be, I'm 6, 7 issues ahead. Okay, that makes sense. Yep. Yeah. Okay. Relating to that, why did you pick Elborak for issue 1 of the Blackstone instead of like James Allison or something? Can you say that? Well, so I did James Allison. Here's what. It seems like James Allison would make more sense, but I did James Allison for the Free Comic Book Day issue. Oh yeah, actually, there was the prequel for the Blackstone. So and I know it's a little frustrating because I know there's probably some people that are going to pick up the miniseries that didn't get the Free Comic Book Day issue. Yeah. As far as reading my essays, you really do need that essay from the Free Comic, because that was the setup essay. Yeah. For the continuity of the essays, like you kind of need that one because it talks about James Allison, right, to set it up. Once they're all in the trade, it'll probably be fine, but I'm sure that's why. I was thinking about it. I was like, I mean, Elborak at least was in the story. James Allison just dies in it, right? So it would make sense, or like he dissipates or whatever. Yes, you would think setting this up, since Allison's kind of the guy that kind of sets it up, right? Is that he would be the essay, but it's because he's the subject of the Free Comic Book. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I completely forgot about that. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I'm realizing now that everybody's forgotten. and like that may have been a mistake.
Well,
like
it
it seemed like a good idea
a
at the
billion
time.
years ago, man.
Right? Like perfect. We'll start with James Allison, right?
Yeah.
But then there was like 5 months before the miniseries came out.
Yeah.
And everybody's forgotten.
Uh-huh.
It seemed like a good plan at the time, but yes,
It happens. No, I think it was still good. I was just like
once they collect it, it'll be fine. And why did I pick El Barak? Because he kind of gets introduced in that issue. I mean, I guess it's probably not too much of a spoiler to say each one of my essays is gonna look at
a different
character, kind of introduce the characters because they're not characters that many people are familiar with. Outside of Solomon Kane. And so that's what I'm kind of using my essays for, is to give people some backstory on these other Howard characters, give them some story, point to some stories if they want to delve deeper, actually read the Howard stories, which guilty as charged. My ulterior motive is to try and get people to read the original Howard stories, right? If you're a comics fan, that's that's kind of what I'm trying to do. Go back to the source and check it out because it's awesome. You've done that, right? You came to this through the comics, and
sort of. So
right?
Yeah. So I used to watch it, or well, I still do. I watch this YouTube channel by this guy called Michael Kivon.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and he used to do the Robert E. Howard show and the Edgar Rice Burroughs show, or something. I can't remember what it was called. And I was really into Tarzan like a few years ago. And then I randomly saw, after I watched one of his videos, that my local used bookstore had a copy of the Cole like the Cole book, right? Like the collection. I picked it up. I started reading it. That was
so cool. You read Cole before Conan?
Yeah, I read the first story of Cole before I ever touched Conan, right? I had seen the movies. And then I saw that the comic book was coming out, and I started liking it, so I decided to buy all of the Conan books. And I have read some of them. I've read the first Del Rey collection book. I am starting the second one this month because it is Sumerian in September. But I've not read all of it, But I like Conan. I think it's awesome.
So you like? Are you? Did you read? You were introduced to Tarzan as well. So this is me. Now I'm quizzing you, right? I'm interviewing.
Go for it. It's
so did you read any Burroughs? Right.
I read all of John Carter of Mars. I read that in 2012 when the movie came out.
Right.
Disney movie. I think it's great. Most people don't like it, but I read all of the John Carter books. I read some of the.
You want to see some fun stuff?
Yeah, show me.
So this is the first edition of Tarzan and the Apes, right here.
Jesus Christ, dude!
This is what I love. This is my collection, so I can just reach back here and pull some cool stuff out for you.
That is crazy.
This is the first edition of A Princess of Mars, the first John Carter.
Dude, I am so jealous right now. You don't even understand. Like John Carter of Mars, the first one is probably one of my favorite books ever. Jesus Christ, dude, that's so amazing. I hate you.
Back here on the show. That's how I roll, man.
Dude, that is so crazy. Just imagining how expensive that was is hurting me, dude. Like Jesus Christ. Oh my God.
Well, this is, I love, I'm an archaeologist. I love artifacts, right?
Yeah.
For the things that I love, these are the artifacts, Yeah. And so for me, this is, I love having these physical representations, right? Over a century old, this book. And, I mean, who's read this book over the years, right?
It looks in perfect condition.
You got it's the first edition. You got like an owner's inscription in here, just beautiful old cursive, dated 1918. I love the history behind this stuff, right? I ask about Burroughs because there's many people, especially my generation and older. I'm solid Gen X, right? I saw Nirvana live, right? Me and like the boomer generation before me that were reading the paperbacks in the 60s, a lot of them were Burroughs and Tarzan and John Carter fans first. And then they were picking up those paperbacks where they were all being reprinted in the 60s. And then, the first Conan paperback with the Frazetta cover came out. And that's how a lot of people discovered Conan. Were Burroughs guys that made the jump to Conan.
That's basically me.
So many people did this. And I love that actually is happening with a younger generation as well. That's super cool. So that's kind of why I ask. But even Howard himself, I mentioned earlier, those early El Barak stories, there's a lot of Edgar Rice Burroughs in there.
Yeah, for sure.
We know a lot of the books in Howard's
Mhm.
library because after he took his own life, sadly, his father donated many of his books to a local library, a local college there, and we have
Yeah.
the accession list
Mhm.
where that survives of the books that were all donated.
Yeah, I saw it.
Many of them ultimately, some of them actually made it back into the Howard house, but
Mhm.
many of them didn't survive. But we have that list.
Yeah.
The author that Howard had the most books from by far was Edgar Rice Burroughs. He had,
Yeah.
he had
Mhm.
all of the early Tarzan, John
Yeah.
Carter Mars, At the Earth's Core. He had all of
Yeah.
those.
Pellucidar.
Pellucidar. He had them
Yeah.
all. And you see that a lot in his work.
Mhm.
Interesting, he doesn't talk about Burroughs much in his letters, the way he talks about
Mhm.
other writers like Jack London and some of the others.
Yeah.
But we know they were in his library. He read them all. He
Yeah.
may have even been a little embarrassed to talk about Burroughs because it was seen as kind of kid's adventure, right?
Uh-huh.
When he's talking to Lovecraft.
Yeah.
But we know he read them, and we can
Uh-huh.
see that influence in his fiction.
Yeah. Isn't the word Sumerian, doesn't that come out isn't that used as an adjective or something in one of the Burroughs novels before he ever used it?
I don't know if
I
Sumerian
feel like,
was Stygian, might have been like Stygian
mhm.
darkness was a kind of a
Yeah,
common
maybe that's what I was
term,
thinking
right?
about.
It's kind of the
Yeah.
adjectival form of the river Styx,
Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
um, but
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I don't know. That may be.
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
feel like that's the case, but I
could
can't
be.
remember.
It very well could be. There's a number of
Mhm.
one of the most famous iconic
Mhm.
scenes in the Conan movie
Yeah.
is when he's crucified,
Mhm.
right, and he bites the vultures, by the neck with his teeth,
Yeah.
right, when he's
Uh-huh.
crucified. Um, that that does come from a Howard Conan story, an original Conan story.
Yeah.
It comes from A Witch Shall Be Born.
Mhm.
But that original scene, Tarzan does that in Tarzan the Terrible.
Really?
He bites a
Oh, okay.
vulture's
Yeah,
neck.
yeah. Yeah, I've
Yes.
only read the first four Tarzan
Right?
novels just because I
One
haven't
of the
had
most
time to read all of
iconic
them.
Conan
That's
scenes
so cool.
actually
Yeah,
comes from a Tarzan story. So just throwing that out
yeah. That's so
there.
cool. I really love the interconnectedness of all of these people.
It's very cool. Oh yeah, here's Tarzan the Terrible. Here's the first edition of that, just because.
Jesus Christ, dude.
Oh,
Oh my God. How
yeah.
many of those have you had? Do you have all of them?
I've got the first 10 in first
Okay,
editions.
that makes sense.
I've got a few of the later ones. I've got some of the
Mhm.
John Carter ones. I've got some of the pulps too. I've got a lot of them in the original pulp magazines as
Yeah,
well. But yeah, it's fun.
that's
I've
so
got a lot
cool,
of
dude.
Howard stuff down here too. That's all further down here, but yeah.
That's crazy,
I
dude.
love this stuff. I love the
Yeah.
books. I love the physical media.
Uh-huh.
I
I
love the
agree,
pulp
man.
magazines. I love the comics. I'm a
Mhm.
collector. I love this stuff.
Yeah.
It's I don't know. I'm kind of I guess I'm a hoarder, but at least I'm hoarding like stuff that my kids will be able to sell someday when I'm
Yeah,
gone. Right?
that's fair. Yeah.
Well,
Okay, so I thought of another question here.
sure.
Okay, I know you've basically been collaborating with the IP for quite a while, but
Yeah.
like now that you're actually actively doing so, right, or
Yes.
more so than before, has your perspective as a fan changed now that you're also like a collaborator, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think it has. I
I'm
hate to
hitting you
say
with
that it
weird
has.
questions, man. I'm sorry.
No, that's a great question. Actually, that's a good one. Because a lot of these questions I get all the time. This is a good
Yeah.
one. I think my perspective as a fan has changed in
Mhm.
general, and when it comes to writing pastiche Howard stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
I was, and you may have, if you watch Michael K. Vaughan's
Yeah.
podcast, you know a lot of the backstory about El Sprague de Camp
Yeah. He talks
and
about it all the freaking time.
right the Conan
Yeah.
pastiche stuff, and
Yeah.
for many years, there was to put it in
Like a
context.
purist movement.
Yeah, because a lot of people my age and older, you read the Conan stories first in the paperback
Yep.
versions,
Hmm.
or they read the comics, they watched the Arnold movie, then they read
Yeah.
the paperback versions, which were all heavily edited
Yeah.
by L. Sprague de Camp. You'll
Yeah.
get a few de Camp apologists, like a good friend of mine, Gary, you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You know, who will say, oh, well, he didn't really change that much. You know what I mean? Like, and if you look at each individual story, for the most part, that's technically true.
Yeah.
But the bigger changes came in the way they were packaged. Right.
Yeah.
And he took the Conan stories, the original Conan stories, which Howard wrote, for example, out of chronological order, right? You know, they were written, you know, the first story, he's a king. Next story, you know, he's a young thief, or he's, you know, Frost Giant's daughter. He's, you know, whatever. You know, he would jump all around, skip around in the chronological Conan timeline. You know, the camp tried to put them all in chronological order. He wrote in filler stories to kind of fill them together. He was trying to create a Conan epic, right? Which was what was selling at the time because of Lord of the Rings and some of the other stuff, right? He was trying to make something that was more commercially appealing, or what he thought would be more commercially appealing at the time, 1960s and 70s. And, you know, it's an interesting way to package it, but it was a very different vision than what Howard himself was trying to do. And the bigger problem is that the camp actively fought against anyone trying to publish the original Howard version of the stories. Carl Edward Wagner, who's a you know, great early sword and sorcery writer, you know, writer in the 70s and 80s.
I have one of his books in here.
Wrote, you know, the Kane stories, right? Highly recommended if you haven't read them. Go out and read, you know, Carl Edward Wagner. Wagner was a big fan. A lot of these fan arguments took place in the Robert A. Howard Amateur Press Association, REHUPA, REH, UPA, the Robert E. Howard Universal Press Association. This is an old type of fan activity with paper and staples.
Hey, I signed up for the Borough Bulletin. I know what you're talking about.
And Wagner, like, named people were members of this organization. Today, you met Bill Cavalier. Bill Cavalier is the current editor of REHUPA. It's still going on. I'm still a member. We still do this paper fanzine thing, like old school, right? But back in the day, the camp was a member. Wagner, you know, Carl Edward Wagner was a member. They would fight tooth and nails in this fanzine back in the old days, you know, arguing about this stuff. Rusty Burke and these guys were, you know, the camp would not let people publish the pure Howard stuff for the most part. Wagner tried to do it. He had a deal with the Science Fiction Book Club in Berkeley, and he started publishing some of the original Howard stories, at least the versions that were published in Weird Tales in the pulp magazines. And the camp shut him down. 3 volumes came out, but the camp shut him down legally and stopped them. You know, and you know, these are guys that are in the same like fanzine organization together, right? Like
dude, come on.
So it literally took the camp dying in the 90s before you could really get pure Howard out in a mass format. You know, Bain was able to get a lot of it out in the 90s, you know, in paperback form. But the real, you know, publishing moment came with the Wandering Star and Del Rey editions that began with Solomon Kane in the late 1999. And then eventually all the other stories were published, Bram McMorran and Conan, and then Cull, the horror stories. They were released in you know, mass trade paperbacks by Del Rey. They began as beautiful limited editions by Wandering Star, which, if you have those editions, you know, I've got some of this here. Like, here's, like, this is the Solomon Kane, you know, limited edition by Wandering Star. That's, you know, became the Del Rey version, right?
Jesus Christ!
It comes with all these plates. It's illustrated by Gary Gianni. The idea was to do this like in the style of the old illustrated books by N.C. Wyeth, like Treasure Island and things like that, right? But more importantly, these are all the pure Howard texts, and not even always just the Weird Tales versions, right? You know, for the Conan stories, the 3-volume Conan stories, Patrice went back where he was able to and would use the original typescripts. So getting back to the purest version of Howard that exists, that we had access to, he would go back to the final typescript where it's available, right? So even before Farnsworth Wright, the editor of Weird Tales, was able to get his hands on it. so the Conan volumes, again, illustrated, by Mark Schultz and Gary Gianni. These are just beautiful, beautiful volumes. These are hard to get, the limited editions, but you can get the Del Rey's, right? So, so it was finally like that war with DeCamp after all those decades that all of the hardcore fans were doing the Howard purists, as they were often called. That war was finally won with the release of the Wandering Stars and the Del Rey's, and then the Robert E. Howard Foundation, which, I'm on the board of directors of the Robert E. Howard Foundation. They published all of the other Howard works that Del Rey really wasn't interested in doing. To be frank, some of the lesser genres that aren't going to sell as well, detective stories and pirate stories and things like that. So between the Del Rey's and the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press volumes, all of Howard's major work has now been published in its original form, in its purest form available. For people like me that do academic work, this was critical. You could never really do any academic work on Howard because we didn't have a pure text edition to be able to cite, to be able to reference as an academic. Lovecraft was decades ahead. Like Lovecraft scholarship was decades ahead of Howard scholarship. Because of that simple fact. We didn't actually have, authoritative text to be able to cite, So that was a watershed moment. And so all these years, there's always this kind of, with the purest Howard fans, a real just anathema against any kind of pastiche. All the tour books that were published in the 90s, by all the people, really couldn't stand them. There were one or two, they were like, okay, well, John C. Hawking, okay, man, he kind of gets it.
Hey, he's such a nice guy.
Grudgingly accept in there because he gets it. Like he understood the Lovecraftian elements in it, and you're like, all right, well, that one's not so bad. But mostly we hate it, right? I mean, there was this real, sort of anathema to pastiche. But it was mostly because you couldn't get the real Howard stuff. It wasn't available. Now that it's available, it's like that war is won, right? Howard is out there. The pure Howard texts are out there. Most people younger than me, I said most people older than me, like read those DeCamp versions. Most people younger than me don't know who DeCamp is. Unless you're watching Michael K. Vaughan, you don't even know, right? So that war is won. Now there's an easing, like I personally feel much more okay about pastiche now. Let's do it. We can do it now because nobody's taken away from Howard. It's not replacing Howard. Howard's out there and he's never going away. And and Paradox, Fred and Jay and Paradox, Heroic Signatures now rather. Those guys, they have been champions of Howard. It's one of the great things about having the new series, partnering with Titan and Heroic Signatures, is that Titan is really just the publisher, and most of the content is still being directed by Heroic Signatures, by the rights owners, and so even though we're doing pastiche, we're trying to at least keep the spirit of Howard's work there. And we're trying to always reference Howard and make sure that people know. That's why I'm writing the essays in the back and pointing people back to Robert E. Howard, So, so that's, I think, what makes it okay. That's where I've changed as a fan. I've become okay with doing a lot of the pastiche stuff now. And it was
integral to it.
Like, listen, I just wrote a pastiche story. I'm like, oh my God, right?
I became the enemy, dude.
20 years ago, me would be cringe. Like, oh my God, what are you doing? Writing pastiche. This is how I've changed, and this is why. And I went into a long kind of discourse there about it, but I see a lot of this conversation. I see a lot of older fans coming back now that maybe only remember the DeCamp versions and things like that. And maybe like, well, what's wrong with the DeCamp version? That's what I grew up with, the Lancers, Well, there were problems there, right? And if you weren't a part of that, that fandom struggle through those years, you may not realize why there's a certain group of Howard fandom that is still a little twitchy around pastiche stuff, and even now, like when I'm at Howard Days, like you were at Howard Days. For those who don't know, Robert E. Howard Days is a small little kind of mini con that's held every year in Robert E. Howard's hometown, Cross Plains. It's very much a Howard purist environment, But even there was a great, and Jim Zub went there this year. Not even as a guest, just going as a fan.
Which is awesome.
He was a little scared, man. He was like, I don't know, man. They're gonna like eat me alive there. No, it's cool. Trust me, because they know that you're truly a Howard fan, right?
Yeah.
That even if maybe they don't like what you're doing, or they think it's this is better than that, or whatever, they got little gripes here and there because fans are always gonna have little gripes.
Of course.
They know that your heart's in the right place.
Yeah.
And that you're trying to honor Howard. And at the end of the day, that's all we can do. And that's what I try to do. But yes, have I evolved in my perspective on these things? 100%.
Yeah.
For better or for worse, some people might say I've turned to the dark side now.
No,
but I think it's okay. I hope that I mitigate that with my essays where I'm at least pointing people back to Howard, right?
Yeah.
But again, I think it's okay. Howard is there to stay. It's okay now to explore these characters in other media. It's Conan, for example, is a character that I think, much like a number of other iconic characters of fiction, Dracula, Sherlock Holmes, Tarzan, Superman, right? These are characters that have now transcended their original medium that they appeared in, right? My kids don't think of Batman as a comic book character anymore, right? He's a video game character. He's a cartoon character. He's a movie character, right? Conan is kind of the same way now. Conan has transcended his original medium, the short story in a pulp magazine, right?
Yeah.
He's a video game character. He's a comic character. He's a movie character. Hopefully there'll be other media that he'll appear in. I wish I could say more.
Fingers crossed, man. I want
fingers crossed. I know there's some irons in the fires. I wish I could talk about.
Yeah. don't even tease me about it. Don't.
But and so that's okay now, right? For people that are like the hardcore purist Howard fans, where I come from, we've won that battle. Howard's there. He's on the bookshelves. He's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
We're doing academic work on Howard. I've got a chapter in an essay collection that's coming out from the University of Texas Press, or Texas A&M rather.
Yeah.
Ooh, there's probably some Aggie fans that are really pissed now that I just said.
My sister just crazy.
That's going to be coming out next year. That a number of us have contributed to. We're doing academic work on Howard. Howard's not going anywhere. So we're free. Let's have some fun, with these characters and enjoy it, and maybe use these other media to bring new fans in that will end up reading Robert E. Howard.
Yeah, I get that. It's kind of hard because like the original author has been dead for 100 years. Like 100 years. There is nothing. Almost, there is nothing more that can be done with the character that hasn't already been done. So you have to expand to something else, right? And
you take them into other media.
Yeah, but if you want to make money out of it, you can't just do that. You can't just do like the most basic kind of approach, right? You have to like expand it, right? But I mean, maybe you could argue you don't need to do that. You could just leave it alone, right? But no one's gonna do that. So.
Well, but then you do. But then the character does end up going the way of, sadly, Tarzan, right? Who's kind of a dated character. The Lone Ranger. Think how popular the Lone Ranger is before your time.
Yeah.
Before my time, right? Hugely popular character in the 50s and stuff like that. There was a Johnny Depp movie a couple of years ago. There was a complete bomb, right? But
that was not bad.
These are characters that just fall by the wayside that were once hugely popular. Buck Rogers, right?
Flash Gordon, although he's kind of making a comeback-ish.
Listen, I love, they're trying, right? You should see my Flash Gordon collection. It's
Jesus Christ, no. I don't want to see that. I got like an aneurysm or something, dude.
Right, I probably got I got a bunch of stuff. You know me.
Jesus.
But I love collecting characters that like nobody like knows who they are anymore, right? Like these old school like amazing characters from the early 20th century, right? But but you're right. Conan, though, I think in some ways he kind of transcends, there's certain things about the character of Conan that I think always brings him back to popularity, even when sometimes he goes through a period of where he sort of wanes, in public awareness. And that's because the character of Conan himself, Howard wrote Conan during the Depression. And in many ways, you can see that in the character.
Yeah.
Conan is he's not just a sword and sorcery character or fantasy character from the past or whatever. He's really a Depression era protagonist.
Yeah.
And I've written about this a little bit in some of my essays, but you think about the popular culture figures in the 1930s that were popular during the Depression, right? Think about the Depression, right? This is when banks failed, right? The economic system, the systems that are supposed to prop up civilization failed everywhere.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so you have this incredible cynicism about the institutions of civilization.
Yeah.
The popular, figures at the time, the folk heroes of the time were bank robbers, not the bankers. The bankers were the enemy. It's Bonnie and Clyde and John Dillinger. These are the people everyone wanted to read about, the bad guys that were thumbing their nose at society and trying to, hey, society's going to collapse. That's all right. I'm going to go out and take mine, at least take care of myself, right? That's what Conan was, right? He's a bandit. He's a pirate. He's a thief. He's all of these things, right? He's somebody that goes into civilization and looks around him and realizes, hey, this is a house of cards. It's fake.
Yeah.
Right?
And he fucks it up. He just breaks it. Yeah.
Fucks it up, right? He goes in and, he's the monkey wrench in the cogs of civilization in the story. He comes in and disrupts things and ends up being successful. He, takes what he wants when he wants it. But he's able to succeed despite the civilization around him. Yeah, he's a fish out of water, right? But it doesn't matter. He succeeds because of that, not in spite of it, right? And so anytime we get into periods of history where there is this cynicism towards the institutions of civilization, that's when you see Conan becoming a popular character again, resonating, the 1960s, right? The paperbacks came back in 1966 and were popular all through the late 60s when we're going through the counterculture revolution. Yeah. They wane again in the 80s, right? When all of a sudden you get, civilization comes back and the hippies become yuppies. He comes back into popularity in the early 2000s, the video games and the books and the Dark Horse comics.
Yeah.
When again, with things like coming after 9/11 and the Gulf War and things like that, people are also becoming, cynical of politicians and institutions again, regardless of what your political party are, right? People are becoming cynical again of politicians. And we have stayed there, right? Which has kind of made Conan continue to be popular, honestly, for the last 20 years, really. He stayed there. You at least, Conan Exiles, that video, first there was Age of Conan video game, Conan Exiles. The video game, I think those of us that are, fans of the stories and fans of the comics and things like that, underestimate the fandom for the video games is huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. It's way bigger, than I think even the comics fans, which I think probably would surprise a lot of people if you look at actual numbers, right? So the character of Conan, I think, often resonates during times of, societal cynicism, let's say.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. That means that Conan should be immensely popular with people of my generation, but
you would think
he's not
because they don't know yet.
Exactly.
They don't know yet.
Conan.
All right. So now it's my time to ask you, how do we do that? How do we do that? I know I know you've thrown some ideas out before. I want you to throw them out again because I'm hoping some of the folks at Heroic Signatures are watching this. Actually, I know they will be. Tell them.
Oh God, no! I don't want them to watch.
No, they will. It's too late.
Okay. Jesus Christ! They put me on the spot. Oh God. Okay. I think honestly, the most important thing is probably to make some sort of adult animation. I know people want live action all the time. I get that that's really popular, and especially with like House of the Dragon and stuff like that, or The Boys, where this like over the top type shit is like really popular right now. But I don't think that really holds up because people are getting tired of that by this point already. I mean, season 4 of The Boys was significantly less like than all the other ones, right? And I think it might be time to turn away from that. But an adult animation, like a Tartakovsky animation, right? Like Primal, would be awesome for Conan. Like something like that, it would be awesome. And the way that you're smiling makes me think that there is something like that in the works. But Jesus Christ, dude, I'm going to throw myself off a bridge if that happens because that'd be amazing. That would be so freaking cool.
I mean, I think we can talk about Primal. I mean, so and this is very timely, right? What is the first episode? The first episode of Primal. Do you know its title?
No, I don't remember now.
Spear and Fang.
Oh, well, there you go.
For those who don't
introduces
know,
the characters. Yeah.
Spear and Fang was Howard's first story that he sold professionally in 1925. It's Weird Tales. It was a caveman story, basically.
Yeah.
Right. That's not a coincidence that Tartakovsky chose that name. It's 100% an homage.
Yeah,
to Conan. 100%.
I mean, even the style.
He's not even being like. I mean, he's not even being subtle about it by calling it Spear and Fang, right? Those that know, right? Next year, in fact, will be the 100th anniversary of Howard's first professional sale, right? In 2025. Tartakovsky's a big fan. Primal, let's face it, it's Conan with the serial numbers filed off.
Yeah,
I agree. I would love to see.
It's freaking wonderful, dude. It looks so great.
It's funny you talk about the heroic signatures, guys. I just want you to know this. Like, so Marcus Cronander, who's the head of marketing there. I texted him beforehand just to let him know, hey, by the way, I'm gonna be recording a podcast with Hobbies of a Man. He's like, oh my God, he's such a sweet guy. We love him. Literally, that's the text.
That is immensely nice. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all of you guys.
Don't be nervous. They love you.
All right. Well, thank you all very much.
But so they're probably watching this. So you're speaking to them right now. This is good. Tell them this stuff because I agree with you, man. I'd love to see that. They hear this crap from me all the time. They need to get people like you. You want to get young people watching. I loved your idea. You brought this up before, doing a manga, right?
Yeah, I think a manga would be amazing because that is like the comic book style that's in the zeitgeist right now, like especially with people my age, right? Everyone watches anime and everyone goes and picks up the manga afterwards, right? I think your son's about my age. Does he read manga?
Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
He watches anime all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Right?
This is how I agree with you 100%. I think I do know, I can't talk about actual projects in the hobby,
obviously, yes.
But I know that everyone's aware of this, and they're trying to find ways to get these characters out in various media. It's hard. I mean, to be frank,
I agree. I understand that completely.
It's tough to get things to fruition. Yeah. It's pre-production's easy.
Getting it all set up, it's just like making it actually get through the cross.
It's tough to get stuff across the finish line. It is so hard. I can tell you this because I've been a consultant. I've been consultant on a number of projects that didn't make it. Yeah. And some of which break my heart because they would have been so damn cool. But they just never made it past, the initial stages. And you just, it's hard. It's hard to sell stuff out there these days. Everyone that's out there, the fans are, why don't they do this? Why don't they do this? Listen, let me tell you, I 100% know they're trying. They know all these things.
I'm one of those fans too that just yells at the rooftops and like, do this, but I understand that it's hard. But
trust me, they're trying. But I will tell you this: the success of this new comic, which took everyone by surprise, it's how successful it was. Yes. I mean, I think we knew it would do well, but or thought it would. We're like, this is good. I really think we got something good.
It's kind of ridiculous how good it is.
But it blew up.
Yeah.
Just blew up. That first issue going to 5 or 6 printings. Yeah. That does the only modern comic I can think of that did that at first is Walking Dead. There's very few comics that do multiple printings these days. Even more significant is issues 3, 4, 5, 6 going to multiple printings. It's one thing for the first issue, right? You usually get the drop off. The multiple, I think it's more significant to have issue 4 or 5 go to a second printing, even than issue 1 going to 4 or 5 printings, right? Yeah, that tells you there's legs, right? That's word of mouth, saying this grew and grew. Yeah, it grew, right? So this is going to help potentially. It can't hurt, right? Yeah, you've got the comic to look at, to point to. That, to be frank, maybe helps erase the stigma of some of previous projects that didn't go so well. I
was about to say that.
Right? I mean, to be real, that was a hurdle. It was a hurdle. Yeah. Right? Having to dig back from that, which sucked. I think that we're far enough away now, and now we're having success with the character again, that we can,
try.
God, I don't want to
Yeah.
jinx anything. Damn it! Like I don't want to say anything because I don't want to jinx anything.
Don't say anything at
I'm
all. It's
very
fine.
hopeful.
Yeah. I think so too. I mean, my
got a
idea
new
is,
role playing game.
yeah.
There's a new role playing game coming out. From
It's on Kickstarter right now. If you guys want to check it out, I'll put a link to it down below.
Yeah. Check out the new role playing game. That's a start too.
Yeah.
Gaming is huge. Tabletop gaming is huge. That's D&D has something I grew up with, right?
Yeah.
That's another thing that's blown up and become almost mainstream in the last 5, 6, 7 years.
That would be a good idea for getting the word of Conan out there, because right now watching people play D&D online is very popular.
Yeah.
Maybe Sean Curley and maybe Jim Zub could do.
Oh, dude. Did you ever see, like when we did the Modiphius game, one of the fun things we did for the Kickstarter was we played a test of that right there in the Robert E. Howard house.
Yeah. You guys did that Howard
Days. This past Howard Days, we played. We didn't play in the house because there was too much going on with the Howard's desk coming in and all that. But we did play there in Cross Plains. We did a test run with Jim DMing. With me, with Mark Finn, Howard biographer, Howard Andrew Jones, one of the great sword and sorcery writers today, who
he's having difficulties.
He's having some health issues right now. Howard, shout out to you, love you, man. If you see this, John C. Hawking, You don't know if you guys recorded that, did you? What's that?
Do you know if you guys recorded that?
We did not record it. Shawn was cool, that was the plan.
Yeah,
but Shawn was busy doing some other interviews and stuff. He was running around like a madman.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, Shawn Curley does the official Conan YouTube channel for Heroic Signatures. He was there at Howard Days. He filmed a lot of stuff. We did want him to film that, but he was too busy, getting other footage. I know did he interview you?
Yeah, for like a few minutes.
I don't know.
Yeah, no. I did a little segment for his channel, but it hasn't come out yet.
Yeah, he's got a lot of footage that I know he's like pulling his hair out, getting it all edited. Hopefully it'll all get out there eventually. We got footage of just me and Jim and Shawn cruising around town in the convertible in Howard Days. Right?
That was ridiculous. That was so funny. Yeah.
So we'll see. Hopefully that'll be out soon. Shout out to Shawn and the Conan YouTube channel. But so yes, the role playing game is coming out. That's another. I expect that's going to be a huge success too. All of these hopefully will build on each other, and we're going to see Howard's characters, not just Conan, hopefully, but maybe some of the others too, in various media. Obviously Conan always leads the way usually, right? But
hey man, I think Dark Agnes movie would
that be cool?
Be awesome. Yeah.
Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah, especially because like the whole idea now is like, strong female characters, right?
Yeah.
And Dark Agnes is like one of them.
And she's kind of hardcore. Like if you read the story, there's a lot of
badass.
There's anger there. There's her playing with gender issues and things like that, right? That I think that are very relevant, I think, to a modern audience, and that would be, it would take a good writer to really do that character justice, I think.
Sure.
But with a good writer, man, it'd be cool. She's a character. She's dark, a lot of anger, a lot of, you can feel in her, I feel like some of the anger and frustration that many women probably feel with the constraints that society puts on them. And she fights back against that in a very violent way.
Yeah, very raw.
Female friend of mine that's started reading the stories and became familiar with the character. She's like, wow, she's like Stabby McStabberson. She gives zero fuck. Like, fuck you, I'll kill you. Stab. She's an interesting character, Dark Agnes.
Very like feminine rage kind of type of character.
And with a good writer, probably, to be frank, probably a good female writer, I think, really,
that would probably
that character justice would be amazing. I think Solomon Kane has a lot of potential. I think there's that's a character that can tap into a completely different audience, right? The horror audience for a large part, right? I do a lot of Lovecraft stuff too. I go to Necronomicon, been a guest there a few times, and always talking to people. I'm always like the Howard guy, like at the Lovecraft events, right? But right. But when I'm talking to them, they'll all be like, yeah, I read Conan. Yeah, it's all right. You know who I really like? Solomon Kane, right? That's what you get from all the Lovecraft guys, 100%. So I think there's a whole different audience there for that type of story, for the Solomon Kane stories that can be tapped into in various media. So I'd love to see that. I think that I'm hopeful. We had what was called the original Howard boom in the 1960s, right? When the character kind of came back in paperbacks and then comics and things like that, right? In the 60s and 70s. We had kind of that was the golden age. We had kind of the silver age probably in the early 2000s with the Del Rey's coming out, the Dark Horse comics, and Age of Conan video game and things like that. I hope that we're in sort of a new maybe a Bronze Age, right now, and another, renaissance for Conan and the other Howard characters, and that we're going to see them in other media. I think we're starting to see that. I think we're just on the verge of that. As always, the comics are a pillar usually, just like they were in 1970 with Marvel and in the early 2000s with Dark Horse, and now with Titan. The comics often lead the way in these Conan and Howard resurgences. And
that makes sense.
Maybe we're seeing it again. I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic. Obviously I'm a little biased.
I think everyone wants it back. I think Conan and the Robert E. Howard characters are very special, very interesting, and they're kind of like a special thing because it is a U.S. writer. It is a creator of so many genres. It is a guy that kind of, is seminal to, Texas specifically, but I think U.S. literature, right? In like the in the pop culture sense, maybe if you don't want to
certainly popular literature, absolutely, 100%.
And Conan is someone that doesn't get enough.
He doesn't get enough credit. A lot of the academic work that I've done. Even, because I'll go to even academic conferences, like the Popular Culture Association conference. I was the area chair for pulp studies there for a number of years. Jason Carney's there now doing an amazing job. I would go to things like the International Conference of the Fantastic and the Arts, which is a big academic conference for science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Even in those venues, Howard is still a little bit in the gutter, right? And we have to fight and we have to make the case and we have to do that. And I've spent the last 15 years doing that with a number of other, academics, people like Jason and Mark Finn has gone to these, and Jonas Prida and Daniel Look. I'm shouting out some names to, some of my buddies that have been doing this, that have been, that have published academic volumes. And, right now, like I said, we're going to have another academic volume on Howard coming out from Texas A&M Press, University Press next year. That is going to keep that going. So, we're trying, it's there. It's kind of there, right? We're not quite at the level even of Lovecraft studies, and getting that kind of recognition for Howard in the corpus of American literature. At least as someone who was a significant pioneer. Is he the best writer out there? No, okay.
It depends.
Probably not, right? Yeah. But there are times at his best where he approaches literature, I think. Things like Worms of the Earth, Beyond the Black River. There are some of his Crusader stories, incredibly powerfully written stories people don't even know about. He approaches it, I think, at times, but he's certainly significant in popular culture. He's certainly someone who has created a character in Conan the Barbarian that's an archetype, right?
Enduring.
An archetype of the barbarian hero, right? We wouldn't have He-Man. We wouldn't have Khal Drogo. We wouldn't have a lot of these. We wouldn't have the barbarian class in D&D, right? If it weren't for Conan, So that's, if nothing else, he created this archetypal barbarian character in fiction that really didn't exist before that. Not really. And so if nothing else, he's a pioneer, in this sort of, subgenre of popular culture of sword and sorcery.
And Conan is such an enduring character. Like Robert E. Howard deserves some credit. I mean,
yes,
this guy.
He certainly does. He certainly does. There's a reason why, the volume that's coming out that I mentioned is basically focused on Howard as a Texas writer. Mm-hmm. Also, something that hasn't really been done before. There've been academic volumes on him, writing about Conan and Sword and Sorcery and things like that. Mark Finn and I even did one in a weird Western academic volume, writing about the horror from the mound, that story I was talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. But there really hasn't been a whole lot done on Howard as a Texas writer. Mark Finn, in his biography Blood and Thunder, which shout out is now finally available in ebook.
Yes, I saw that. Right? I pre-ordered it.
Do it, read it. Right. Mark Finn was one of the first to really kind of look at Howard as a Texas writer and put him in that context as a Texas writer. Yeah. This academic volume that's coming out is going to explore that from a number of scholars. Names, some names you'll recognize, some people you met at Howard Days. Yeah. Right? I mean, and you're looking at that idea. My chapter, I do look at some of his weird Westerns. And I look at how Marchers of Valhalla is one of the stories I kind of take a look at, right? Where I take a look at Howard putting Texas into his weird fiction, right? Like you're taking elements of local color and things, elements of Texas, him trying to tell Texas stories and putting them into his fiction, like Horror from the Mound. Valley of the Lost is another one that's that was. It's a gunslinger fighting the worms of the earth, basically, but in Texas, right? And then Marches of Valhalla, where the Hyborian Age comes to Texas, so that started to be done, right? At least putting him in the context of Texas literature. Yeah. So that's
the first step. I think so.
It's a first step, right? Yeah. And appropriately, it's a Texas university that's publishing this. So
yeah, that's cool.
We'll see.
Can people that are not like in a university purchase that book? Like how does that work? Or like
it'll be out there. Unfortunately, it'll probably be expensive.
Yeah, of course.
Academic books are often very expensive, which is unfortunate. But you can always do interlibrary loan. There's ways to get them. That is a problem with academic publishing. But what it does do is this is something I found, some of the academic work, it took a number of years, but I see on academic.edu now, there's grad students out there writing master's theses and things like that, citing me and Jonas Prida, and, Daniel Look and Jason Carney and, Dirk Gunter, those of us that have been doing academic work, they're starting to cite it now. Yeah. People that I've never even heard of, right? That are now actually referencing this stuff. It's not just like the fandom circle anymore, they're using the Del Reys as the text to cite. So they're all using the same text, it seems like a simple thing, right? But it was a big deal. Like we couldn't really even do any real work until we had the real Howard text out there. Mm-hmm. So there is this critical mass now, and there are students out there that are that are doing this stuff. So it's slowly changing. Are we ever going to see Howard in like a Norton anthology of American literature? Yeah,
that'd be awesome.
It'd be awesome. If we ever did, there is like a Norton anthology of short fiction. Maybe someday. And if I had my pick, honestly, if you asked me, like, you can pick one Robert E. Howard story and it could be in a Norton anthology. Mm-hmm. What would it be? I'll tell you, honestly, it wouldn't be a Conan story, although there's a couple of great contenders. Tower of the Elephant, Beyond the Black River.
Exactly. The ones I would pick. Right? Yeah.
It would be Worms of the Earth.
Yeah, everyone talks about that story. I've not had a chance to read it, but
it's longer, which might be a problem. But one of the things, it has all of the elements, the thematic elements that matter to Howard on a philosophical level. Yeah. He was trying to get in there. You've got it's Bram McMorton against the Romans. You got barbarism versus civilization. It's got Lovecraftian elements in there. It's essentially a sword and sorcery story, right? So you've got his primary genre that he's best known for. Mm-hmm. You've got themes of evolutionary anxiety and the things that he loves to play with, like evolving and devolving and some of those kinds of things. And even the racialist anthropology, although it's not as like, it's not quite
good,
as
but it's
ham-fisted as it is
Yeah.
in some of the others, right? It's there, right? But it's less whatever. You get Howard introducing sexual elements and themes into his stories for the first time. That's sort of starts appearing during this time period, in the late 20s and early 30s, really, coinciding with the time when we know that Howard started visiting some of the brothel towns across the border of Mexico, right? It's like you can almost tell the point where Howard gets laid, right? You can see it in his stories, right, when it starts appearing. So you get some of these themes, right? And it's just a powerful, dark, Bram McMorton is such a brooding character. It's almost tragic. It's almost Arthurian in some ways. I think there's actually some Arthurian elements to the Bram McMorton story that a lot of people haven't really picked up on or run with yet. So I don't know. For me, that's probably my favorite Howard story. It's tough. If you ask me any day of the week, I might have a different one. It's like there's 3 or 4 that rotate. But yes, that's one I highly recommend for those of your viewers that haven't read that story. Check it out. And you never know, we may see Bram McMorton in the Titan comics.
I hope so. I know Jim has like a 60 issue plan, so I hope that Bram McMorton shows up at some point.
That's my one teaser I'll throw out there.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Jeff. I don't want to hold you too much longer. I know we could talk for like
God, we've gone on for over 2 hours.
Yeah,
this is fun though, man. I'm having a blast.
So I want to thank you for showing up and for talking with me and doing this interview for me. I appreciate it. Is there anything that you want to promote or talk about before we leave, right? Like you've mentioned some things, but is there anything you want to promote or talk about? Or
sure. I mentioned the role-playing game that's coming out. Matt John, good friend and colleague of mine is really kind of the the driving force behind that. Check that out when it comes out. Keep reading the comics. If you like my essays, write into Chainmail and tell them that. So I'll get to keep doing them because I enjoy it. I love it. But at the end of the day, I want to promote Robert E. Howard, right? That's what I'm doing here. If you're a comic fan and you enjoy the Conan comics, especially maybe if you're enjoying the introduction of some of these other Howard characters into the storyline, go and check out some of the original Howard stories. That's what I'm. That's kind of what I'm here for. There's not a whole lot for me to really promote or plug. My own work other than what I'm doing with the comics right now. Unless you want to get a part of a private tour to Stygia. I'm trying to put
Jesus Christ. I'm never gonna go.
We'll get Mahmoud for the Savage Sword story. We're gonna go to Egypt.
That's ridiculous. Although I have seen
Stygia. Why
that
not?
sort of thing happen and be more popular.
Let's do it.
Yeah. No, there's a few people that have done that. There's a YouTuber called Luke Caverns. I think he's another local Texas guy. Yeah, and then the Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
Yep,
have you heard of
familiar.
that? Yeah, they do all that stuff.
And you know me, I'm a big fan of what we call, I kind of like to use the term pseudo-archaeology because
but Graham Hancock's cataclysm theory.
But listen, I am over here is my pseudo-archaeology collection. I got first editions of Ignatius Donnelly. You should see my Atlantis collection.
Yeah.
Right? So I love this stuff, right? I do a lot of. One of the actually another book I am working on right now is the intersection of things like pseudo-archaeological thought, alternative history ideas, and its intersection with pulp fiction, in particular Howard, Lovecraft, these guys,
sounds amazing.
How they're using things like Atlantis, Lemuria, Lost Continents, and these ideas in their fiction. How that fiction then in turn feeds back into the people that write about alternative history and things like that. A lot of people may not know, today, the whole idea of lizard people, shape-shifting reptilian aliens,
Yeah.
You can draw a direct line back to Kull and the Serpent Men.
Yeah.
Via, there was this one particular guy, Dorial, this occultist in the 40s and 50s, that was a big fan of Pulp Fiction, and borrowed a lot of stuff from Howard and Lovecraft, and it fed its way into sort of New Age literature and ancient alien stuff, in the 50s and 60s and 70s. So, Howard had a tremendous influence on a lot of this stuff. Here, for those of you that might be Graham Hancock fans, if you're, like he's promoting this ancient lost civilization at the end of the Ice Age, particularly in the Younger Dryas period.
Yeah. Right.
That's the same thing Howard was drawing on when he created the Hyborian Age at the end of the Ice Age, right?
Yeah.
The Hyborian Age is, it's at the end of the Ice Age after a cataclysm. You have this lost epoch of civilizations, and then there's another cataclysm and another mini Ice Age at the end. That's the Younger Dryas. Right? It had just been discovered in Howard's time, right? And he was playing with this idea. So Howard and Graham Hancock are actually, drawing the same stuff, right? That's kind of cool, right? And so one of the things I talk about doing the trip to Egypt. One of the things I would like to do is go and do a tour where we actually explore some of those alternative ideas and visit some of the sites that are controversial and stuff like that. Talk about both the mainstream theories, but also talk about the alternative theories. And you're there in context where you can see everything. Yeah. Make up your own mind, right? I would love to do something like that. That's actually kind of what I have in mind. So we'll see.
Awesome.
And hey, it's Age of Stygia.
Okay. Now you
would enjoy that.
Yes. Jesus Christ. That'd be amazing. Okay. Anyway, so thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Everyone down below, leave your comments. Thank Jeff for showing up. And I think that's the end of the interview. So see you guys on the next episode.
Thanks so much for having me. Had a blast.
All right. Thank you very much, guys.